I think it remains an impressive thing to sometimes tell people that my late father-in-law, a businessman, used to spend his evenings sitting in an armchair reading the poetry of T.S. Eliot. When I married his daughter, she brought to our life together a Volkswagen Bug, a stereo, several books by and about T.S. Eliot, and an ambition to teach, guess what, literature and poetry. She was and is her father's daughter. It was plain for my father-in-law that there was no life without poetry, and I would hear him say it sometimes. There's no life without poetry. It was his recognition that life is missing something. It's incomplete without the poetic dimension. Now, by the poetic dimension, I'm making reference to a certain essential quality and intensity of emotion that a great poem, or indeed a work of art, evokes. It's about being transported to a level of feeling or a level of meaning beyond the prosaic, that is, beyond the everyday, beyond the here and now. And great poetry, I think, ignites a longing to inhabit this particular dimension more and more. Life is simply felt to be worth living on those fortunate occasions when the region of the poetic is felt in response to the vitalizing power of an idea or image expressed in an original and refreshing way. My father-in-law surely understood this, for he took the time to memorize great poetry, and he'd often, either spontaneously or upon request, recite reams of poetry to the delight of all. Now, it's also clear that he cared about his business, but I always had the impression that he cared more for how he felt when he read the great poetry. The clear giveaway was the way he organized his study. I can see it now. There he would sit in the midst of a library of hundreds of books, a member of a dying breed of classically oriented, high-minded gentlemen, the antithesis of the half-wits who squander their time and energy in front of video games. It was ever so plain to anybody who visited my father-in-law that before their eyes was a class act who was someone who was more than a businessman. Indeed, he was someone who had a life. So I think it's a challenge to say as well that there's no life unless we choose to live in a poetic way. And what I mean is to live poetically is to live life in a meaningfully expressive way, which requires a determination to express the deepest that is in you. Failing that, I don't know what life is, for it can't possibly be satisfying to live life as some kind of like passive spectator, like watching somebody else score the goal. I mean, how long do you go on living as some kind of like uncreative blob? Surely at some point, for life to have meaning, one has to come into his own in some kind of vital and creative way. Someone recently told me with some anguish that she tried to express her search for meaningful expression to her mother, but was immediately shut down. Mom doesn't understand. She's simply baffled and confused by her daughter's searching questions. Sad to say, Mom doesn't aspire even to understand, probably never will, which is so hard to accept in a parent. The dear mom simply doesn't go there. She doesn't reflect. She doesn't ask questions that might lead to truth and understanding. Each day she gets up and she gets going, never pausing to ask what it's all about. Life happens, but she's not in it. She thus remains undistinguished from the herd of those who do likewise. So such a mom does not come even close to entering life's poetic dimension. She's living the unthoughtful or unexamined life, or in terms of what I'm saying today, she's living the unexpressed life, for she's not finding creative ways to express what she uniquely is. She's too busy for that, and therefore cannot relate to a daughter who searches for more than she ever has. But life, as Gail Sheehy wrote, has passages in it, and each passage has to be negotiated fully, like it has to be lived out. And that's before you can go on to the next level. And along the way, says Sheehy, changes are not only possible and predictable, but to deny them, like not to change, is to become an accomplice in one's own unnecessary vegetation. So Gail Sheehy's as a voice crying out to say that if we don't change, we won't grow. If we don't grow, well, we're not really living. Now, on the other hand, the contrast to this, it was when it was my great privilege to behold in the living room of my own home a young man who described the transformation he has witnessed, or the transformations he's seen over the years, in his work as a drama director. And with great conviction, my young friend was saying that as a drama coach, he was able to accomplish stuff that he thought was more effective or better than like personal therapy or anything else he could think of. Like, in so many words, like you could be some kind of like a loser in every way. You can have been described as like a wipeout, a loser. You could be a crook, a criminal, whatever. But under his influence, he thought in that context, he could help almost anyone to get in touch with thoughts and feelings he didn't even know he had, which I think is an incredible gift to offer to another human being. Imagine playing the role that you help someone to find what was hidden to him, to bring out thoughts and feelings he didn't even know were there. My young friend is someone who often is inspired, but especially on that day, I remember it vividly, in my living room. There he was, the very definition of inspiration. He was that. He was lit up with passion and with enthusiasm, and he was in a fully expressive mode, speaking from a place within himself of high inspiration. In fact, his oratory was truly poetic. It was high drama in our living room. Now, when I emphasize this business of expressing in a meaningful way, I'm not talking about mere expressiveness. I want to make that clear. I've added the word meaningful to qualify it. It has to be meaningful expression. I'm not interested, don't care to hear somebody simply express, to get out their stuff and to sort of sob about it with Oprah. I'm not thinking of merely expressing, but of a level of meaningful expression that is morally elevating. The work of art that you do, whatever it is, has got to take you to heaven's doorstep, or perhaps right through the door to heaven's throne. Otherwise, like, it's not worth anything. Lots of people express, like, who cares? Far fewer express in such a way as to inspire an aspiration for sanctity. So my meaning isn't to learn how to simply mimic, to paint by number, but to be creative, and not, heaven forbid, to join the kitchen band. Stay with me for a moment on the kitchen band. I have a horrible memory of the kitchen band. It was when I was a hospital chaplain, and I beheld at a nursing home the elderly expressing themselves by hitting, I can't even say it, pots and pans together. They were members of the kitchen band, trying out for the larger version of that in hell. For myself, I'd rather be taken out young by a drone than to be led eventually down a hall to join some hellbound kitchen band. So I'm not talking about simply expressing, but expressing in a meaningful way. That's to enter the poetic dimension. It's to reveal something new, something perhaps unique, or something spiritually edifying. And it has to do with what you or I have been exploring and discovering, and then we express it as best we can in whatever way matches our passion and our aptitude. So living poetically is making the attempt, even if you can't quite pull it off, but just to be involved in that creative process of expressing in such a way that through that expression, through that meaningful expression, there might be some illumination that comes from it, or some wisdom, or some beauty. I was thinking about this, and I recently met a little boy in a coffee shop sitting next to me. He noticed I was writing, and then this little guy said to me, "Can I read your article when you're finished?" I couldn't believe it. This is some kind of little kid, and I found out, he was 7 years old. He was in grade 2, and he wanted to read my article, and I thought, wow. And he looked straight at me, fully expecting me to respond, to take him seriously. And I thought, who's been taking him seriously? Like, who created this kid? And then I met his mom, and it was clear immediately what the difference was. She'd been teaching him to become such a bold person, confident boy. He was a potent force at the age of 7 years old. Now, it's interesting to me that I had this meaningful contact with the little boy and his mom because earlier in the day, that day, I'd been kind of out of sorts. There's no way I was expressing in any kind of meaningfully expressive way. I was nowhere near it. It was my birthday, and I was in something of kind of a passive, disengaged mode. I was feeling kind of ambivalent about my birthday. I wasn't feeling all that excited about it. But to manage my day better, I decided I would start to write. I was going to journal. And actually, then I started writing an article. And I was sitting in a Starbucks. And I began to express something. And I started to inspire myself. And I began to enter that poetic dimension that I'm talking about. Well, in some measure, I succeeded because I became so absorbed in attempting to be creative that it led, I think, directly to the connection with that little boy and his mom sitting next to me. My effort to create, to be expressive by writing, facilitated a highly meaningful exchange between myself and the people at the next table. It was pure poetry between us. So what I'm saying is the poetic dimension is entered when we express meaning as best we can in our own particular way, whatever that might be. Enter that dimension with another person or with a group of like-minded creators, and you'll sleep better tonight, and you'll be happy to get up tomorrow because you're participating in a deeper mode and more fulfilling mode of being. There is no life without poetry.